Hello again, I'm Miranda Kahn.
And I'm John Bachman. Coming up this hour on Newsmax Now, Rand Paul ends his faux filibuster just before midnight. After hours of talking, did he really accomplish anything? J.D. Hayworth joins us live for a breakdown.
Plus, you know what they say, if you want to stay healthy, stay out of the hospital. Coming up, a special report on the new health dangers experts are finding at medical centers all around the world.
And this summer, the Boy Scouts are banning water guns and balloons, saying pointing simulated firearms at people is not allowed. A wise move, or another example of the so-called swaddled generation.
Is that what it's called? All that and much more coming up on this edition of Newsmax Now. Good afternoon and welcome on this Thursday, May 21st. It's rubbing off on me, see?
Yeah, you're thinking about Friday, not Thursday.
I am. I'm wishing it was Friday.
All right, well, a lot going on right now. Police are hunting for a suspected killer in Washington, D.C., and pizza may be the main clue that has cracked that case so far. But first, on Capitol Hill, Rand Paul has been talking a lot about the Patriot Act.
Right now, we're treating every American in one category. There is a general veil of suspicion that is placed on every American now. Every American is somehow said to be under suspicion because we're collecting the records of every American.
Just a clip of the 10 hours Kentucky Senator Rand Paul spent talking about that, also presidential candidate, on the Senate floor, speaking out against the bulk collection of phone records by the NSA. That provision in the Patriot Act that allows it is set to expire at the end of the month. New York Congressman Peter King, speaking to Newsmax exclusively, slammed Paul, saying that what he is doing out there on the Senate floor is misleading, fear-mongering, and inexcusable.
A study that said people opposed to gay marriage could have their minds changed by a short conversation with a person who's gay is now being retracted. Study co-author and Columbia professor Donald Green says he had to issue a retraction after finding out his co-author allegedly faked the data. The study was published late last year in the journal Science.
Police in Washington, D.C. have now identified their suspect in a quadruple murder at a mansion not far from the official residence of the vice president. Darren Wint is now wanted on first-degree murder charges. Several reports say his DNA was found on pizza crust at the scene of the crime. He allegedly killed a couple, their 10-year-old son and a housekeeper, and then set their home on fire. Police say he also got away without $40,000, and as we heard not too long ago, they are looking in the area of Brooklyn, New York. They believe he could be there. An Omaha police officer has been killed in the line of duty one day before she was supposed to go on maternity leave. Officer Carrie Orozco was killed in a shootout yesterday afternoon. The suspect was also killed. Officer Orozco gave birth back in February to a girl prematurely. She had delayed taking maternity leave until the baby could actually leave the hospital. That is supposed to happen today. She leaves behind her husband, their little girl, and 2 stepchildren. And a frightening prediction from former Deputy Director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, on the war on terror.
I believe, based on my experience, that my children's generation and my grandchildren's generation is still going to be fighting this fight.
Yeah. There he is speaking to our own Steve Malsberg there. Mike Morrell says it will take years to turn around the radicalization process. He also says that's part of the war on terror that America has not done very well at. He says we have been good at taking out current terrorists on the battlefield and protecting the homeland.
Speaking at a business roundtable in New Hampshire, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush places the blame for the rise of ISIS on President Obama. He says the withdrawal of 10,000 American troops allowed ISIS to grow, and he believes, knowing what we know now, those troops should have stayed. Federal investigators are now sifting through cell phone records of the engineer in charge of that Amtrak train that crashed last week. They want to know if Brandon Bastian was on his phone when his train hit a curve in Philly. The train was going more than twice the speed limit. Engineers are supposed to have their phones off when behind the controls. 8 people died and more than 200 were hurt in that crash. Great Britain needs to be a less attractive place for illegal workers. That's what British Prime Minister David Cameron is saying today as he unveils new controls on immigration.
Uncontrolled immigration means too many people coming to the UK legally but staying illegally. And people are fed up with a system that allows those who are not meant to be in our country to remain here.
Long-term migration has just been surging in Great Britain, hitting nearly 320,000 people last year. That's compared to about 200,000 the year prior. Cameron says wages paid to illegal immigrants will be seized as crime money. He also wants to restrict migrant access to Britain's welfare system.
And that messy cleanup along the California coast continues today. Crews are out scouring sand and rocks after that oil pipeline burst near Santa Barbara, dumping tens of thousands of crude oil on the beach. Out in the ocean, that oil slick is about 9 miles long now. This is the worst spill to hit Santa Barbara in about 2 decades. And we welcome you back. Was it a worthy use of the Senate's time, or should we call it Rand-standing, like the National Journal did during his talk fest? Not technically a filibuster, Rand Paul asking folks to support him by texting the word filibuster to a certain number on their cell phones. One could make the argument that this was perhaps less about the Senate and the Patriot Act and more about Rand's political future.
And joining us now to go in depth on the issue is J.D. Hayworth, host of Newsmax Prime. Good to have you on here.
It is great to be back with you guys. Thanks very much.
All right, so what do you think about Rand's talkathon yesterday on the floor?
Well, the Senate rules such as they are allow it, because you don't have to be germane to the topic at hand. Now, it's worth noting, and we don't want to get way down in the weeds on this, but the reason why technically this was not a filibuster is because the Patriot Act was not being debated. This was part of the preliminary action on the trade bill, which is a bad deal on a whole nother front. But the rules of the Senate are these. You can stand up, seek recognition, and if you are granted recognition, you can control the floor as long as you stand on your feet. You may defer to other colleagues for questions. Other colleagues may let you rest your voice. That was the case yesterday for Rand. And while he is running for president, it is worth noting one of his competitors for the nomination, Ted Cruz, also backs what he has done. So to say that, gee, it was grandstanding for president, I don't buy it. I don't agree with every jot and tittle of what Rand is saying here, but he is utilizing the rules of the Senate as a duly elected and sworn in United States senator.
And will it be effective?
Well, it certainly raises the argument. And indeed, when we saw the treasure trove of all the bin Laden information released yesterday, my question last night on Newsmax Prime to some of the guys in the know was, hey, all the bin Laden stuff coming out now as we're having the debate about intelligence and about the Patriot Act. I was assured that was not the case. But it is part and parcel of what happens. Sometimes you go to the floor to raise an issue. And that was what was very important in the mind of Rand Paul, and certainly his trademark kind of fusion of libertarianism and republicanism is based on trying to repeal the Patriot Act.
Now, he stopped his rant before midnight last night, which, again, we don't want to get too much into the rules, but that would have actually delayed other issues that the Senate has to take care of today if he would have gone that far.
And it's unfortunate, but the Senate has cleared the way now for this TPP bill. As Dick Morris told us, this thing has serious problems in terms of ending up almost like a European Union type thing with the free migration of labor, i.e. illegals, tearing asunder our existing immigration law. It's a bad deal on another subject, but I know you want to talk more about Rand, so I'll restrict my
Well,
comments.
actually, we'll let Rand be. We've Ford and I we talked about it a lot in the last hour about what he was doing on Twitter and how Ford's word was trolling folks through the filibuster online. But we can leave that there for a discussion off air, JD. But I also want to talk about the conversation you're going to have tonight. Speaking of that treasure trove of information, Osama bin Laden's bookshelf. Special guest tonight on Newsmax Prime.
Imagine you're an author and your book shows up on Osama bin Laden's bookshelf. Michael Scheuer put out a book a few years ago. I believe the name was Imperial Hubris. Had some kind comments, I guess, under the guise of an intelligence evaluation of Osama bin Laden, but not knowing the context, and I don't know just how fluent bin Laden was in English. He might have thought it was something for his newspaper clipping file or something.
But
so
a lot
we'll have
of these
Scheuer
countries,
on.
I mean, a lot of them learn English.
Well, certainly,
Yeah.
and there's a photo. We'll have to find it somewhere in this day and age of being able to search things up. Osama bin Laden and his family.
In
As
Western
a kid,
clothes.
he was like 17. They're in New York City.
Right.
He's leaning. It
know
was so
exactly
long ago.
which one you're talking about.
That Lincoln Continental. He's leaning up against it because his dad, of course, was a very wealthy contractor in Saudi Arabia, and certainly not the guy he became. And thankfully, in my opinion, a guy who is no longer on the scene. But we'll talk to Michael Scheuer about his book and about bin Laden. Also, former CIA director. Ambassador Jim Woolsey will be with us. That's Newsmax Prime tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, here on Newsmax TV.
We will be watching, JD.
We will.
More to come here on Newsmax Now.